Hello and welcome to Showdown. Thanks very much for your company. Joining us now out of Adelaide is Greens Senator Sarah Hanson-Young. Joining us out of Melbourne is Kelly O'Dwyer, Liberal MP, who frankly should be on the front bench, but for some reason he's been left to languish on the back bench. And joining me here in the studio is Ed Husick, who was once languishing on the back bench, but as a result of moving to Kevin Rudd, suddenly you're Kevin Rudd's Parliamentary Secretary. Congratulations.
Thank you. You know that Sarah's actually in Sydney.
Oh, she's in Sydney. Sorry,
I am in Sydney.
I just assumed you were in Adelaide, but you couldn't be bothered to come out here and join us in the Sky News studio, so you're there in the CBD. We'll come to you in a moment. I just want to start with Kelly O'Dwyer, if I can. The opinion polls show that it's neck and neck. It's 50-50 apiece, if you're to believe the latest Galaxy poll. Your side of politics has spent 3 years telling us that this government is probably the worst since Federation. What is so wrong with the opposition that an equal amount of voters want to re-elect this government as elect your side?
Well, thank you, Peter, for that question. Look, we always said, Peter, that it was going to be a very close election, and we're quite right. I mean, we're being proven right on that. It is going to be a close election. I think there are some Australians who haven't yet focused on exactly what is at stake here, and as we finally get closer to an election date, and we look forward to hearing that date whenever it might be announced by Kevin Rudd when it suits him.
Well, it could be announced, Kelly O'Dwyer, it could be announced this weekend, but let me ask, I mean, even taking that as it is, that you always said that it would get closer, you probably don't want it to be this close, but why? Why so close when this government, as you've told us for so long, is just so utterly terrible? What is it about Australians where they just seem to be incapable of making an obvious decision based on the sort of rhetoric we've heard till now?
Well, I'm not going to cast aspersions on the great judgment of the Australian people, but I think that what we do know when we actually look at leadership changes in the past is that there is always a little spike when a new leader takes over. There is always a honeymoon period, and I think that's what we're seeing at the moment. All
right, Ed Husick, can I ask you straight off the bat? You now work very directly for Kevin Rudd, not just as part of his broader team. Do you think that Diedrich Bonhoeffer would have sent asylum seekers to Papua New Guinea?
Why would I have to reference your weekend article again?
Well, it's good of you to raise that, actually. Anyone that missed it, it's obviously online.
It was a great article, Peter.
Oh, God help me, Kelly.
So do you agree with it, Kelly O'Dwyer? Because my essential premise was that there's a problem with Papua New Guinea, but Scott Morrison has said if it works, he'll keep it open.
No, your ultimate premise, if I read your article correctly, not that I'm looking into your mind there, Peter, and looking at your intentions, I think was that Kevin Rudd has been a complete hypocrite on this subject, and you gave three very salient examples on this, and you talked about how he talked about the greatest moral challenge of our time, only to dump the ETS. You also talked about the fact that
this was actually a question to me, but look,
all right, well,
let's have half an hour of Kelly.
I
wasn't going to interrupt Kelly O'Dwyer, but you have. So
having
done that, well, let me ask Ed Husick here, because he does work directly for. You do work directly for Kevin Rudd now as his parliamentary secretary. Do you think that Diedrich Bonhoeffer would have ever tolerated sending asylum seekers to Papua New Guinea?
I'm no expert on Diedrich Bonhoeffer, but what I am certainly focused on, a lot of other people are focused on, is the fact that we should not be having, and actually Sarah Hanson-Young and I were both on, Senator Hanson-Young and I were both on the inquiry that investigated the tragedy that occurred in 2010, and I respect that we have both very divergent views on this issue, but for mine, I
suspect hers are more in line with what Diedrich Bonhoeffer would do, but we'll get to that.
I can't abide a situation where people will lose their lives in that way. I've spoken up on this issue countless times, and I still believe that we need to ensure that we do not allow people who profit from this to continue to do that in this way.
So is it a case of, in terms of the people that end up in Papua New Guinea, is it a case of you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelette? You know, bad luck, you're going to end up there, but that's part of the deterrent so that less people come by sea in the years to come.
No one need end up in PNG if they do not make that trip.
But it's already going to happen. There are already a lot of people that will end up there.
And in the course of us well, look, if you want to keep interrupting the whole night, I'm happy for you to do that. But, I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that no one need end up in PNG if they do not take that trip. And as a consequence of that, consequence of that, we also ensure that people who are stuck in camps, who have languished and seen the best years of their lives pass them by, actually get out of those camps and get to Australia.
All right, look, Sarah Hanson-Young, let me bring you in and put the other side of the argument, I guess, which is that what is so wrong with sending people to Papua New Guinea when it's taking them willingly? It is a signatory nation to the relevant UN conventions, and it plans to remove its exceptions as part of the deal that has been struck by Kevin Rudd. Yes, it's a poor country, but we're not. Are we obliged to give asylum seekers fleeing persecution wealth? We're just obliged to give them sort of sanctity from that persecution, aren't we?
Well, first of all, we're obliged not to punish them just because they came to our country in a particular way, because that was the only option they had. I mean, dumping people in Papua New Guinea is meant to be punishment. Let's not be too cute about this. It's not a great place for refugees. If it was, the government wouldn't be suggesting that we dump people there and make them stay there forever. And the conditions on Manus Island, we know, even just in the last week, the reports that have come out are horrendous. They are below what international standards are, and international standards are below what we would normally expect here in Australia. So they are pretty horrendous conditions.
But the government's theory, Senator, is that this will stop the boats, and if it stops the boats, then by definition it will stop the drownings, and it'll also stop so many people ending up in PNG, as horrible as it is. They actually won't end up there because they will choose not to come here in the first place.
Well, so there's 2 points there. Either it's so horrible, so horrible that it could match the terror of where people are fleeing and what they're fleeing, because that's the only thing that is going to act as a deterrent. And if that's the case, that's pretty poor. That Australia's only response to desperate refugees is to be as cruel as the regimes that they're fleeing. The second thing is it's hard to think that we would be doing that. So therefore, is it really going to stop the boats? And then the third thing is, let's be real about this. This isn't about stopping and saving lives at sea. Look, I know that that's a motivation. I know that Ed is right. He and I both were on the inquiry that looked at the Christmas Island boat tragedy, and it was awful. It was horrendous, and we all came away from that inquiry just heartbroken about how you deal with this situation. And one of the things is we have to be giving people options other than boarding those boats in the first place. And even if you believed that deterrence did work, you've got to be doing the other stuff. At the moment, the only option for people in Indonesia, the only viable option, is to be picked up by a people smuggler and put on a boat to Australia, and that is wrong. That shouldn't be the case. We should be intervening there and giving people a safer option. Helping the UNHCR get through claims would be a start. At the moment, there is just a massive backlog, and then with a genuine commitment to take more of those people.
Are you convinced that these are all genuine refugees? Because a lot of the rhetoric now is suggesting, Senator, that they are middle-class Iranians that are taking advantage or have been taking advantage of the visa relationship between Indonesia and Iran to get to a better life in Australia, rather than actual fear of fleeing persecution.
Well, that's Bob Carr's argument, of course, and yet he's got no evidence for it. And regardless, there hasn't been any claims assessed in the last 12 months, so I don't know where he gets this from. He's got to be. We've got to be assessing people's claims, and all of the claims that are assessed over time and statistically have proven that over 90% of people who arrive here by boat are found to be in genuine need of protection. And look, don't get me wrong, if people aren't in need of genuine protection, after we assess their claims, they should go home. I don't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with denying
But what's wrong with sending them to Papua New Guinea when it's a signatory nation? If they're genuinely fleeing persecution, they can end up in Papua New Guinea, which has ratified the convention and will remove its exception.
Well, because Peter, it's only there. This policy has only been put up to garner votes in the race to an election. It's not going to stop people drowning at sea. It's about inflicting suffering, pain and cruelty, so as an act to deter people. And it's about sending a message to the Australian electorate that we don't want these people here. That's what this is about. Let's not pretend otherwise. Well, if it was about saving lives at sea, we would stop people boarding boats by giving them a safer option, and we're not doing that. The Houston report suggested 3,800 people should be immediately resettled out of Indonesia. The government hasn't done it.
It suggested a whole range of other things, though, that your side of politics aren't that happy with. But we've got time. We'll get to all of this in a moment. Kelly O'Dwyer, can I bring you in and ask you this question? I mean, obviously the opposition has a job to do, holding the government to account, criticising policy where it doesn't think that it's either going to work or is going to be well implemented. I get all of that, and we're so close to an election, the temperature is always going to go up as far as that goes. But is it responsible to be doing it so publicly in this respect, in terms of vote arrivals, where you've got Scott Morrison and you've got Tony Abbott out saying this policy will not work, it's flimsy, it doesn't have any safeguards, etc. That sends a very clear message to people smugglers, which is don't listen to the Australian Prime Minister or the government, listen to the opposition, which means we can keep coming by vote.
Well, I think it's absolutely responsible, Peter, to actually ask pretty basic and fundamental questions. What this government has a serious issue with is actually answering those questions.
But shouldn't this all be going on behind the scenes, I guess, is my point. And that's the government's fault for playing megaphone diplomacy as much as the opposition. But why can't you do this behind the scenes?
Well, I actually think that the public does have a right to know the answers to these basic questions about the implementation of the government's plan. I mean, let's make no mistake here. I mean, firstly, just listening to what Sarah had to say, I mean, not one thing that she had to say just now was about what the alternate green solution is to this
that's not true, Kelly.
very complex problem, and I don't think anybody takes any joy in talking about this issue. But there is one thing that we have been completely consistent on, and that is our solution to discouraging people smugglers, their criminal networks, and exploiting vulnerable people in taking this very dangerous journey. It's four things. It is working with our neighbours through that Bali process, which, by the way, was the process that we set up when we were in government. It's having temporary protection visas, so returning people where it is actually safe for them to go back home.
Kelly O'Dwyer, can I ask you about TPVs? I'll let you get to the other two in a moment, but on TPVs, what's the time limit on a TPV? No one's been able to ever tell me that when I ask the question. Presumably, you can't leave someone on a TPV for, 10, 20 years if the country that they've fled from continues to be in war, such that they could end up being forced to go back there after that length of time. There has to be an end point, surely.
Well, look, certainly that's an issue that the Shadow Minister, I'm sure, will announce as we progressively unveil our policies. But I think the point is actually in line with one thing that Sarah did say, which is she has no problem with people going back home if it's safe for them to return back home.
No, if they're not in genuine need.
And that's indeed, and that is entirely the point of the temporary protection visas. That if people no longer have a genuine need, no longer can be considered genuine refugees that require the succour here of the Australian nation.
But you have to cap that, though, don't you, Kelly O'Dwyer? Because 2 or 3 years, 5 years, there has to be a point at which someone is setting up a life in this country, albeit understanding that temporarily that might be the case if their homeland suddenly gets better. But you have to provide them with some certainty at some point. Why can't we have a timeline on that?
Look, I'm quite confident that we do, and we take the best possible advice from the various different agencies that advise the government, including the UNHCR, on that very question. So, this is not an arbitrary decision that is made by the Minister, nor by the government of the day. It is taken with a great deal of consideration and advice from all of the various authorities that you would expect to be consulted on that very point. But if I can just continue with the final 2 points, because I do think it is important to note this. Our policy has been consistent on this from the get-go. We've also said that offshore processing is part of our solution. We've also said turning back the boats where it's safe to do so.
Can I ask you on turning back the boats? A lot of tweets from supporters of the Liberal Party say I shouldn't refer to that as towbacks, I should call it turnbacks. What's the difference?
Well, basically, we had 7 occasions, as I understand it, during the previous coalition government where there were boats in Australian waters where it was safe to make sure that those boats who were Indonesian flagged vessels to turn them around and ensure that they went back into Indonesian waters and returned to the country of origin from whence they came.
So there's no towing that goes on, it's purely you turn them around and sort of give them a wave?
Well, look, I can't speak from operational experience, but I can say that it has been successful. It is something that we instituted in the past, and it has been something that did work in discouraging people from making a very dangerous journey. And I think we can never underscore the point that more than 1,000 people have lost their lives at sea in undertaking this journey. We now have more than 1,800 children in detention, whereas previously, during the last coalition government, we had no children in detention. Now, like Sarah, I don't want to see people, and particularly children, in detention. That is something that this government has done through dismantling the border protection mechanisms that were in place in August of 2008. And I have heard no apology from any minister, from the Prime Minister, who was himself responsible for doing that.
Let's get one right now before we go to a break. Let's get one from...
We're about to see both
Senator.
This government, the Labor Party and the Liberal Party have both agreed that children can be detained on Manus Island and Nauru indefinitely. I mean, you can't have it both ways. You either believe that children need to be protected or not.
Senator Hanson-Young, I'm not going to have at the same time a suggestion that that the Greens are holier than holy. I mean, your electoral base will not allow you to make any move on this issue that would see effectively anything contrary to what you've said at the moment. And in looking at offshore processing and any of the moves that have to be made to counter what people are profiting off this, you will not move. You will not work with the government in any way. It has to be entirely on the Greens basis.
Ed,
now, the reality
I'm happy tomorrow.
Hang on a second, Senator Hanson-Young. I listened to you extensively.
Sure.
The fact of the matter is this: that people are using the opportunity. To make profit off this. They don't care if the life vests are equipped. Or that vessels are equipped with life vests. They don't care if the vessels are seaworthy. They don't care if the people are able to actually pilot those vessels. And they make that trip and they come here. And they take the chance that 4 out of 100 will be the limit of the number of people who perish or disappear in the course of making that trip. It is simply unacceptable. We wouldn't accept any workplace in this country having a record with 4 out of 100 employees would lose their lives in any given year. Why do we tolerate it on the seas? Simply because we can't see it.
What's your response to Senator Hanson-Young's comment that if you were serious about deaths at sea, you would go to the point of origin and
let me deal with that, because I was actually going to get to that point as well. So if we have 40 million displaced people on the globe right now, 15 million of which are estimated to be refugees, we have increased the humanitarian intake from this nation of 13,000 to 20,000. And so we apply obviously a quota system to try and help people in different parts of the world. You're going to hit that limit really quickly. So you're always going to have a backlog unless you're prepared to accept 15 million displaced persons who are refugees in this country alone, which is simply ludicrous. So we're always going to have a backlog. And coming to the point about processing, the Greens have previously said, for instance, that we should just set up a processing facility in Indonesia and help fast-track the processing of the claims. We've already dealt with the speed at which you process. The Indonesians are not necessarily enamoured with this prospect because all it will do is create a magnet for people to basically go straight into Indonesia and add even more burden to the Indonesian populace of dealing with people who are seeking asylum. That they've previously said, when I've been in Jakarta, that on the issue of asylum seekers, from their perspective, they're dealing with 5,000 people every few months that are coming across the borders seeking to live in Indonesia or seeking refuge. And why would they want to encourage that even further?
Well, they haven't even signed up to the relevant refugee conventions and don't look likely to. Hold that thought. We're going to continue on this subject, but we do need to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to look at some of the wider implications in relation to the ongoing standoff between all three parties in relation to how to deal with the issue of asylum seekers. Back in a moment.
Audi Quattro Drive has been extended to July 31 with free CTP insurance, free registration, free stamp duty and free metallic paint. It all adds up to gripping value on a wide range of Audi Quattro all-wheel drive models. Plus, take advantage of an exceptional finance offer on A4 Quattro models. Hurry, Audi Quattro Drive must end July 31. Visit your Audi dealer or audi.com.au today.
I'm riding your daughter's pony.
I've got your rock.
Got your jet ski.
The major banks and their low-interest accounts are stealing your dreams. Steal them back with a high-interest savings account from Rabodirect. Visit rabodirect.com.au now.
Wheatbix Bites, now available in 2 delicious new flavours. Fill a space with something good.
At Vodafone, we've added an extra 500,000 square kilometres of coverage. So if you don't get that call, it's probably not our network.
I'm looking for a provider who gives me everything I need to trade Forex in one place.
I want customisable charts developed for Forex traders, transparent prices and a stable platform.
I want a provider that presents me with Forex trading opportunities 24 hours a day.
That's why I trade Forex with IG, Australia's #1 Forex provider.
There are many types of... And Hungry Jack's has a new one. The new barbecue bacon cheese, packed with delicious ingredients, plus our thick-cut chips. There's an for every appetite. The burgers are better at Hungry Jack's.
Why can't we put energy to sleep at night?
At Hitachi, we're inspired by challenging questions. That's why, using our advanced power systems and information technologies, we're creating integrated solutions to help cities meet the growing demand for energy, today and tomorrow. Hitachi Social Innovation.
It's our future.
Hitachi, inspire the next.
It all started the day we bought Chloe a mini pig. Now, I've got to admit, Tiny was pretty cute. Trouble was, she started to grow and grow and grow. Luckily, the day before we picked up Tiny, I picked up a new Grand Vitara Urban for the same price as the smaller SUVs I'd been looking at. And with all the extra space, we had a car we could all grow into.
Grand Vitara Urban, from just $25,990 drive away. It's a full-sized SUV for the price of a small one.
Welcome back. You're watching Showdown, where I'm joined out of the Sydney CBD studio by Senator Sarah Hanson-Young for the Greens, out of Melbourne by Kelly O'Dwyer, Liberal MP, and joining me here in the Sky News studio is Labor's Ed Husick. Kelly O'Dwyer, can I start with you and ask about Toll Holdings paying for Scott Morrison to do his latest trip to Nauru to talk about Tent City? Is that appropriate for a company that stands to make millions of dollars out of a coalition policy switch involving Nauru to fund something like that so brazenly?
It's entirely appropriate so long as everything is disclosed. Toll Holdings, let's not forget, is actually under an arrangement with the current government, not with the opposition. It is entirely appropriate so long as all private, trips and or any particular sort of consideration given by a private company is actually made public and very transparent. It's not a big issue at all.
Well, let me ask you about that.
Many members of the government have actually been the recipients of private plane trips to go to China and all sorts of other places. So long as it's appropriately disclosed, I really honestly don't understand what the issue is.
Was it appropriately disclosed? Because it was appropriately disclosed by the journalist, because the Australian newspaper did disclose the role of Toll Holdings in funding the trip. But Tony Abbott, when he was asked about it in the press conference, simply said that it was privately funded and refused to mention Toll. And Scott Morrison's office simply said that it would go on his pecuniary interest without mentioning it. And of course, that doesn't get updated until after the next election.
But what's the point that people are trying to make?
Well, you just said that it was important to have the disclosure, and my point is that the journalist did the right thing, but the leader of the opposition just said it was a private funding without mentioning the company, and the relevant shadow minister said, "Look at my take a look at my pecuniary interest," which of course won't yet be updated until after the election. So, if disclosure is the key, as you put it, we didn't have disclosure other than from the journalist.
But it is being disclosed completely in keeping with the rules. I honestly think that...
I thought we'd aim for a higher standard than simply hitting the minimum of the rules.
Well, look, you do your very, very best in this job, as you do in life. And I think we have seen both Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison declare very openly, very transparently that there was assistance provided to go overseas. The journalist also got that assistance to go overseas. It's no different to what we have seen by so many ministers, shadow ministers, in years past and months past. I think this is a mass distraction, if I might can't say.
Well, and a distraction, Ed Husick, from the taxpayer-funded advertisements in the wake of Kevin Rudd in 2007 saying that they were a cancer on democracy. He'd set up the Auditor General to have oversight, things that never happened. Yet now we've got literally millions and millions of taxpayers' dollars going into an ad campaign, perhaps to deter people smugglers. There must be a lot of them reading the Australian newspaper, because it's over and over again in the newspapers in this country, more so than the newspapers in Indonesia, which is where most of the people smugglers are based.
Well, that's not right. I mean, the advertising campaign that's been undertaken overseas has been just as extensive, and we've been using a number of different outlets to get the message out that if people do undertake this trip, that they will not, reach the intended destination that they have.
Is it a cancer on democracy?
I'm not going into that whole discussion. I think this is an important campaign to undertake, to send the signal out when we're dealing at the same time with an opposition that is seeking to undermine confidence in what we're trying to do, which is to stop people smugglers, being able to profit off this. And their political interests have combined with the commercial interests of people smugglers in the last few weeks in the way that they've carried on in trying to undermine the deal. The most important thing we can have as a nation is to be united on this issue, to stop these deaths at sea and to stop the way this has been operating. So we do need to get through that.
I have to say, Sarah Hanson-Young, on some of the issues in terms of the Greens' policy on this, it does seem that where Labor and to some extent the Liberals have been prepared to compromise, even though they haven't yet found common ground, the Greens don't seem very willing, as Ed Husick pointed out before the break, to compromise at all. There does seem to be a little bit of that third party will never be in government, so we'll stay holier than thou about the Greens' policy. How do you respond to that accusation?
Well, look, I think the debaters moved beyond this just debate of onshore versus offshore. This is about saying, what are we doing in the region to stop people having to be forced into the hands of people smugglers? And I guess that is a little bit of a shift. I'm not just talking about needing community detention and making sure kids get to go to school in Australia. I'm saying in order to stop people boarding those boats, we've really got to focus on giving people safety and hope that if they wait in Malaysia, if they wait in Indonesia, if they can get assistance on the Pakistan-Afghan border, that they don't have to come by people smuggler. Ed says I'm not prepared to compromise. I'm more than happy tomorrow to go out, Ed, and do a press conference with you saying, regardless of what you think about deterrence, let's do what the Houston panel suggested, which was to take 3,800 people directly out of Indonesia today.
Senator, you'd kill him in his Western Sydney seat of Chifley if he did a joint press conference with a Green.
Well, isn't that the point? Is that not the point? I mean, this whole, let's not kid ourselves. The ads in the newspapers across the weekend, the $2 million that was spent on advertising in the first few days was not about stopping people from boarding boats. It was about selling the policy to the western suburbs of Sydney and to other places in marginal seats that Labor desperately needs to get.
Ed Husick, this is a fair point, isn't it? I mean, you wouldn't want to be seen dead talking to... You wouldn't want to be seen dead with Sarah Hanson-Young in the seat of Chifley. You'll want the Greens' preferences, of course, on the how to vote card, but the last thing you want is to be doing a press conference with the Green.
I've often said that your humour's an acquired taste, so I stand that point's been reinforced yet again tonight. I have no problem on this issue. Can I say I'm happy to work, and I think a lot of people are happy to work with either Senator Hanson-Young or Kelly O'Dwyer or whatever, if we can find an answer to this problem.
Well, I'd be happy to set up a press conference in Chifley with you and Senator Hanson-Young. I'm sure that I could get the Green candidate to help me hold the microphone as well.
That would be the most frightening prospect to me in terms of my short political lifespan. But the point I would make is this, that what we had when we tried to have the resettlement agreement with Malaysia is we had both the Liberal Party and the Greens join forces on stopping that. And we haven't had any signal that there's a preparedness to work on this issue. Now, the only thing I would say in response to Senator Hanson-Young is I have not heard any sort of cogent answer or policy prescription being put forward by the Greens on how to deal with this issue.
Neither have I. I'd love to hear it.
The issue that I've said
You've
earlier...
got bipartisan support for this, so let's hear it from...
Well, I just want to make this point. If we agree that there are 40 million displaced people on the planet, if we agree that about 15 million of those are potentially refugees or asylum seekers, and we agree that we've got a 20,000, which potentially could go up to 27,000, sized program, humanitarian, How do we deal with
Well,
it?
let's go to you, Senator Hanson-Young. Do you think that should be increased, that 27,000 figure?
Look, I think it should be up to 30,000, and I think we need an emergency intake out of Indonesia to stop people boarding these boats.
How many in the emergency intake?
10,000.
But according to what Ed's saying, there's still going to be literally millions of displaced people. What's the Greens policy on that?
Absolutely there are, and that is why this whole policy of deterrence and the obsession that we have from the coalition and the Labor Party that having a cruel policy in place will stop people coming is absolutely ridiculous.
Can I O'Dwyer, your response?
It's exactly
I'm
the
just
same
saying
argument.
it's actually not cruel to stop paying dying.
And it is cruel.
It's entirely...
It is cruel to lock children up in indefinite detention in malaria-ridden camps where they then end up harming themselves, where they have no hope.
Can we just give Kelly O'Dwyer a chance to respond to that, Senator? Sorry, Kelly O'Dwyer, your response.
I heard sort of the 40,000 figure, which I haven't heard before, and presumably
30.
after...
30.
Well, no, you said 30 plus an emergency 10. So
that's within the 10. Within the 10.
Okay, so 30,000. What happens, obviously, when you actually get beyond that and more people would like to come? I mean, do you say no to those people?
It's always going to be a matter of dealing with the issues in the region at the time. And we've already heard the Prime Minister the last few weeks saying we have to deal with the issues at the time.
That's the point, that there is actually a point at which you say you need to make an assessment.
Let's take the experience.
Australia has one of the most generous resettlement schemes.
Can I build on what Kelly O'Dwyer is saying and ask you what is the answer to that? I'm curious because I've long been a bleeding heart on this issue, and I've long talked about the fact that who's afraid of 4,500 boat arrivals when that was the figure. We're now at a point where in the last 12 months it's about 40,000.
Yeah.
So what is the answer to when these numbers stay that high for so long?
That's why we need to look at what worked last time we had a huge influx of refugees in our region. What we did, Australia took leadership. We funded the assessment in the region. We showed leadership by increasing our intake and committing to take people. We asked other countries to take more people as well. This is what happened after Vietnam. It's what we should be doing again. It's not a matter of saying,
But do you accept that will go well above the sort of numbers that you're talking about? If we're going to go down that path, we're going to be having somewhere in the order of 100,000 refugees coming into this country every year.
Let me say, if you don't think that being able to put money into funding assessment centres in Indonesia and resettling people out and that isn't going to make a difference, well, there is no way. There is absolutely no way that either this arms race between the Coalition and the Labor Party to set up gulags in PNG and slum solutions in Nauru is going to make any difference.
That is just offensive. Look, at the end of the day, this is what...
One at a time. We'll go through everyone, Ed, and then to Kelly O'Dwyer.
So the points I've been making about the 40 million and the 15 million and our intake, right, is that there is always going to be someone who is not going to have the ability to come here as quickly as they want. So they're going to try and chance their arm. And we need to say, look, you can't do that. We can't physically do that. And what gets me, and I mentioned this during the break when we were discussing this, is we reward people who have liquid assets, the ability to have money to pay people smugglers. The people who get at gunpoint, forced out of home and have to cross borders with nothing and who sit in camps and have no access,
don't sit there for years, and these people that come are queue jumpers.
Exactly. And the thing is, I have on 2 instances in my own electorate people who have seen the best years of their life pass them by sitting in camps who eventually got helped out by us and have set up in my area. Fantastic. But hang on a second. And I've also had, Peter, in situations where Tajiks in Afghanistan who want to get here can't get here because on the face of it they have a legitimate claim for humanitarian assistance, but they can't because the queue is so long.
And the quota gets filled up. Okay, hold that thought. We're going to start with Kelly O'Dwyer when we come back. We do have to take a commercial break. We'll be back in a moment. We'll talk about this issue, get a response from Kelly O'Dwyer, and then we'll try to also briefly move on to some economic matters as well. Back in a moment.
I'll never forget my first visit to the Werther's Caramel Shop. Delicious caramels everywhere, and one who was very sweet. I still go there every chance I get.
Werther's Original, because you are someone very special.
I'm Bear Grylls, and Nature's Own have challenged me to get a good night's sleep.
using the same ingredients as in Complete Sleep Advanced. They use an army of scientists. I'm using my bare hands. Sisyphus and hops are traditionally used for insomnia. Nature's Own exclusively add lactein, scientifically extracted from cow's milk to alleviate stress. Ugh. All I've got is this twig and dirt milkshake. A lot more than just nature goes into Nature's Own.
So you think that chip won't crack? Luckily, Brad caught O'Brien before it came to this. Believe me, every chip will eventually crack. And O'Brien repair using our special resin could be as little as a third of the cost of replacing the screen.
O'Brien. With the protein, energy, and fibre of 2 Weet-Bix and milk, plus 10 vitamins and minerals, Up and Go is packed with nutrition.
Your financial goals are as unique as you are. That's why Colonial First State's range of super and investment options are designed to help you reach them. Because even though your journey may change along the way, you should never lose sight of where you're headed. Talk to your financial advisor about how Colonial First State Super and Investment Solutions can help you find your future.
When something happens out of the blue, whether it's at home or at work, you need a good lawyer and one you can trust. And that's when you call 1-800 555 777. Slater and Gordon. Not a problem.
Not all mobile networks are created equal. And nothing brings phones to life like the Telstra mobile network. Delivering greater speeds in more places, greater reliability, and greater coverage. So choose Telstra to get the most out of the Samsung Galaxy S4 for $11 per month on the $60 Everyday Connect plan. The network without equal.
This is the new VF Commodore. Years in the making. Over 3.3 million kilometres of testing.
Shipped to the States, your new Commodore becomes our new top-of-the-line Chevrolet sedan. I guess now, there's another lucky country.
Redesigned, refined, remarkable. The car that's always turned heads now changes minds.
Welcome back. You're watching Showdown, where Senator Hanson Young, Kelly O'Dwyer and Ed Husick have all been discussing the vexing issue of boat people and arrivals and what to do about it. Kelly O'Dwyer, can I start with you? Are you surprised after, I guess, what you might call the success, or certainly would call the success of stopping the boats during the Howard years, that latest Galaxy poll on the weekend showed that more Australians trust Kevin Rudd and the Labor Party to deal with the issue of boat people than do Tony Abbott and the Coalition? That was quite startling to me. I think it was close, 40% to 38%, but nonetheless, it had Labor in front on the issue.
Well, I can't say that I actually saw that poll, but...
You don't read the Sunday papers?
I can't say I saw that poll in particular, quite honestly. I do read the Sunday papers, but I also work incredibly hard in my electorate, and I had 4 functions on Sunday, so I can tell you I wasn't it wasn't a laid-back day. But let me first respond though to the point that Ed was making before. Look, I find it very refreshing that Ed has finally acknowledged the point that the Coalition has been making the whole time, which is that it is not humane for people to be sitting in camps, to languish there and have no hope of resettlement in Australia. This is a fundamental point that the Greens don't seem to understand, and I know Sarah's going to interrupt me, so just give me a chance to just finish this point. I do think that we need to have a proper system in place. The problem, though, with what the Labor Party is proposing, it is around about the 8th iteration of their border protection policy. We've seen everything from the East Timor announcement, Manus Mark 1, we've seen Afghanistan stopping the processing of their refugees, plus then returning them to home. We've seen multiple iterations of various different policies, none of which have worked because basically Kevin Rudd and the Labor government doesn't have the capacity to implement a decent program.
Which is why I'm fascinated to get your response to the Galaxy poll. You may not have seen it, but I can tell you now what the numbers were. It showed that 40% of people that responded said that they thought that Kevin Rudd and Labor, it was double pinged in terms of who, it was the party and the leader, are better able to deal with the issue of asylum seekers than Tony Abbott and the coalition. It was 40% to 38%. Does that surprise you?
Well, I suppose, Peter, I'm somebody who looks at the facts. This Labor government has created this issue. We've seen just under 50,000 people arrive unauthorised by boat. We've heard from the Labor government that the resettlement scheme, the humanitarian resettlement scheme, is 20,000 people. We have seen more than 1,000 people die at sea, more than 1,800 children in detention, and a $10 billion blowout in the border protection budget. Do I think that the Labor Party is credible on this issue? No, I don't think they are. And this is a party that, by the way, has not had the same number of people wanting to be resettled here than we actually had to deal with during our time in government. In 2002, more than 20% more people actually wanted resettlement in industrialised countries than today. So the problem is not as severe, and yet they still don't have the capacity to deal with it, other than to simply make statements. I mean, they don't even have formal legal agreements in place.
Okay, I want sorry, a quick response, Sarah Hanson-Young, if you can.
Look, I think the awful situation we have here is that there's effectively an arms race going on between the Labor Party and the Liberal Party. Both of the policies are looking more and more the same. If you can even, there's only a slither of difference, and this race to the bottom is totally accelerated. I think a lot of people, regardless of what that poll says on Sunday, I think there'll be a lot of people out there who are just appalled at how tit-tat this debate has got, and how tit-tat and arms race-like the debate's coming from the major parties.
So clearly we don't have any viable answer out of the Greens in terms of how to deal with this issue. And in terms of the coalition, their weaknesses are on two fronts. One is immigration officials, past and present, saying what you did back then worked back then but will not work now. They've been told that countless times. You have to evolve with the move or the changing tactics of people who are profiting of this. They've also had people in the Defence Forces saying either this turn back or tow back policy that they're putting in place won't work either. And frankly, when those boats are under the scenario that's being flagged by the coalition, confronted with the RAN at sea, they'll either turn around or they'll chance their arm and they'll continue, at which point the RAN will be forced to intervene and tow back, or they will do what they did when the coalition was in government, and that is scuttle their own vessels, have people nearly drown,
well, sometimes
and the
worked when the
RAN
coalition
will
was in
have
government.
to,
Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
and the RAN will have to go in and save lives because that's what they have to do in confronting that situation.
Can you just explain to me, why wouldn't you throw everything you possibly can at this issue? Why wouldn't you try all possible solutions?
Well, because,
why on earth
you know what,
are you
Kelly?
too proud
why not tow boats back to Papua New Guinea? That'd be a
introduce the policies
Kelly,
that worked for the coalition government?
So Kelly, when we had that debate, I remember in particular Malcolm Turnbull raising this point during the debate that we had in June of last year, where he said, when we were dealing with the whole Malaysia issue, he said, look, try Manus, try Nauru. If it doesn't work, we come back. Now, I have been on the record saying that I did not think in its previous iterations...
I've got to interrupt. We are right out of time. You've talked your way through the entire program. Ed Husick, we are right out of time. We'll continue this off air. Kelly O'Dwyer, thanks for your company as well. Same to you, Senator Sarah Hanson-Young. Appreciate you joining us as well. That's all we've got time for on this episode of Showdown. Be sure and stay with us here at Sky News because we have PM Live coming.